As night fell, when Jason was left alone in the house, he could not imagine that an innocent ritual, a glass of beer and an unplugged light, would save him from the horror lurking outside the door. His wife had a secret. They claim that excessive alcohol consumption can be lethal, yet Jason Tyler is quite convinced that the third beer he had that evening actually saved his life. With his wife Alexis away on a business trip, Jason coped with his loneliness by watching mediocre television and enjoying good beer, something he rarely did when Alexis was home. It appears the third beer must have filled his bladder because he typically slept through the night without waking, but that night he arose to relieve himself. He checked the clock on the nightstand. It was 2 a.m, and one of the neighbors' dogs was barking, probably the Kleins, since their dog was always kept in an outdoor kennel. Jason wondered about the purpose of having a pet if it was constantly confined, likely just another source of disagreement, among many between Sal and Mary Klein. Jason perched on the edge of the bed, stretching his injured knee, and was just about to stand when he heard another unusual noise. Unless his hearing was deceiving him, his back door was making the squeak it does when opened too slowly. A shiver ran down Jason's spine. Choosing to err on the side of caution, he quickly moved to the closet. Tucked above the door was his old Winchester 12-gauge pump shotgun. Jason's father had been a police officer in the 70s and had once shared with Jason a lesson from the police academy. When entering a building late at night, the first thing you do is chamber a round in your shotgun. It's a sound meant to instill fear in any lurking bad guys. Although Jason's dad was somewhat old-fashioned, this advice seemed prudent given the current circumstances. Even though Jason couldn't remember the last time he felt so frightened, he did his best to steady his nerves, approached the bedroom door, loaded the first of 3 .00 buck shells into the chamber, and then shouted down the stairs with a touch of feigned bravado, "Hey, asshole! Come upstairs. I've got a little surprise for you." The next noise Jason heard was the slamming of the screen door. He dashed to the bedroom at the back of the house and peered out the window. At that exact moment, someone was scaling the backyard fence. It was pitch dark, just 2 nights before the full moon, so although Jason couldn't see any distinct features, it was clearly a man attempting to climb over the fence. However, the intruder dropped something. Damn, was it a firearm? It certainly appeared to be a handgun that the man quickly stashed back into his pocket before surmounting the fence. Meanwhile, the neighbor's dog was going wild, and the Klein family's porch light flicked on. Unfortunately, the light didn't help identify the person sprinting down the alley. Jason returned to their bedroom and grabbed the phone. 911, please state your emergency. Someone just broke into my house. He left and is running away. Are you in any immediate danger? No, I don't believe so. But the guy is fleeing. Maybe you can apprehend him. The conversation between Jason and the dispatcher rapidly deteriorated as Jason insisted that the police respond right away in hopes of catching the intruder, while the dispatcher explained that it might take some time since Jason was no longer in immediate danger and there were other higher priorities at the moment. Jason realized he had overstepped when he asked the dispatcher if those priorities included stopping for a donut and coffee before heading to his house. 2 miles away, Sandy Mason sat in his parked car, struggling to regain his breath. How could everything have gone so terribly wrong? The past week had been dedicated to preparing for last night, surveying the area, determining the optimal parking spot to minimize suspicion, and planning the best routes to and from the Tyler residence. He was well aware of the annoying dog in the neighbor's yard. In fact, he had been walking through the alley at 2 a.m. for the last 3 nights, specifically to make the barking seem like a regular occurrence. His sleep deprivation was beginning to impair his judgment and job performance. Damn it. Planning and carrying out, what a nice term, the perfect murder was no simple feat. This was Sandy's best chance to eliminate Jason Tyler. He wondered how disappointed Alexis would be when she returned from her business trip to discover she's still stuck with that jerk. Although Alexis wouldn't show it outwardly, she was an excellent actress. Sandy knew her true feelings. For the past 6 months, ever since he was transferred to Alexis's department, she had acted as if she had no interest in a relationship with him. Yet all the signs pointed otherwise. The way Alexis smiled while walking through the department made Sandy realize that part of that smile was meant just for him. Now all the effort they had invested in planning that night seemed wasted. Sandy had other methods to dispose of Jason, but they would require more time, and he was tired of waiting for the moment when he and Alexis could finally be together. As Sandy sat in the car, he reminisced about the first time he saw Alexis. It was during a staff meeting, and she was seated right next to him. Her skirt lifted slightly as she sat, revealing 4 or 5 inches of her thigh before she pulled it back down. She smiled directly at him, extended her hand, and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Alexis Tyler." Just like that. Last month he noticed Alexis in the break room having lunch with Susan Oster. He asked if he could join them, and Alexis replied warmly, "Yes, please do," offering him one of her charming smiles. Although Alexis kept chatting with Susan, Sandy felt her comments were indirectly intended for him. Alexis was laughing as she said to Susan, "Sometimes I envy you for being single. I've spent the last 20 years trying to get Jason to pick up after himself. Just this morning I almost had an accident because he left the seat up again. I was half awake and didn't think to turn on the light." Susan replied by sharing her latest funny experience from online dating. They both chuckled at their stories, but Sandy sensed that Alexis was subtly hinting at her growing frustration with Jason. As he held the key to the Tyler house, Sandy remembered how Alexis had left it on her desk that morning, as though signaling for him to make a duplicate. She had been waiting for his report on the Graves audit, and when he stepped into her cubicle to deliver it, her keys were sitting there in plain sight. Taking a chance, he grabbed the keys, made an excuse to the receptionist about an urgent errand, and headed to a nearby hardware store to make a copy. Recognizing the house key was simple, thanks to the distinct ring. Within 30 minutes, he was back with the duplicate and returned to the office, only to find Alexis already back from her meeting. Unsure how to return the keys without drawing attention, he thought of a quick solution. He went down to the parking garage and placed them discreetly under her Honda near the driver's side door. Problem solved. Sandy's thoughts drifted back to the present moment, and as he settled in his car, he let out a deep breath. Suddenly, headlights flashed in his rearview mirror, interrupting his thoughts. Startled, he watched as a police cruiser drove past, making his pulse quicken. Taking a moment to steady himself, he finally started the car and headed home, his mind still racing from the encounter. 2 officers arrived at the Tyler household 60 minutes after the 911 call to inspect the premises and file a report. Officers Jones and Shepard were courteous yet distant, showing little to no empathy for Jason's predicament. As they surveyed the property with their flashlights, the only notable observation was that the back door showed no signs of forced entry. Jason was certain he had secured all the doors before going to bed, but it was clear the police remained doubtful. After completing their report, they exited through the front door. As Jason closed the door, he overheard Officer Jones remark, "Well, Peter, I could go for a donut and a cup of coffee. It's been almost an hour since my last donut. How about you?" Officer Shepard chuckled loudly enough that it might have disturbed any neighbors who were still asleep. By this time, Jason was too wired to fall back asleep, so he brewed a pot of coffee and spent the next 3 hours tackling some paperwork. At 7 o'clock, he called his wife to wish her good morning, deciding not to alarm Alexis about the break-in. He planned to inform her when she returned home that evening, as her flight was scheduled to land at 6:30, and she had driven herself to the airport. When 8 in the morning arrived, he notified his boss that he wouldn't be coming in that day and explained the reason. He also contacted a locksmith to change the locks and install a couple of door alarms. He and Alexis would need to decide whether to set up a home security system. The locksmith arrived and finished the job before 1 o'clock. With nothing else to attend to, Jason went to the office for the remainder of the day. Kevin Smith, Jason's supervisor, had already informed the other employees about the break-in at the Tyler residence, so the first hour was occupied by his colleagues wanting to discuss the incident. Eventually, Jason was able to calm things down and complete a few hours of work. Alexis stood by the door, frustrated as her key wouldn't turn. Her day was rapidly deteriorating, and she was increasingly irritated. The entire journey to Portland had been pointless, all because of Sandy Mason's incompetence. Mason's report on the Graves audit was riddled with mistakes, easily disproven by Donald Graves' documentation. Such ineptitude would be escalated to the department manager on Friday. She was now 2 days away from her husband and home because Mason either couldn't or wouldn't verify his numbers. Donald Graves responded to each of her inquiries with documentation, proving that the Portland office adhered to all of the company's financial policies. She was relieved that Donald remained calm and cooperative during her visit, allowing her to catch an earlier shuttle back from Portland. As the problem solver she was, Alexis moved to the back door and attempted the key in the lock once more. Still no luck. A wave of panic washed over her. Just a few weeks earlier, she and Jason had watched the movie Unfaithful starring Richard Gere and Diane Lane on cable. They were excited because their two free pass celebrities were in the same film. A free pass meant that if either of them found themselves in a situation where they could be intimate with their respective actor or actress, they could do so without facing consequences. They also had free pass musicians and sports stars. Alexis had Keith Urban and James Harden, while Jason had Joan Jett, despite rumors of her being gay, which was irrelevant in their fantasy, and Carrie Walsh Jennings. So, as a spoiler, in the movie Diane Lane's character has an affair with a young French man. When Richard Gere's character discovers this, he confronts the young man and accidentally kills him. After watching the film, Jason told Alexis that if she ever cheated with anyone other than her 3 free passes, he wouldn't fight for her. Instead, he would change the locks and have her served. Now, Alexis was facing the first part of his ultimatum, even though she couldn't understand why, as she hadn't done anything to justify it. Alexis took out her phone and called Jason. Fortunately, he answered on the second ring, and just as he began to say, "Hello, love," the call was abruptly disconnected. "Jason, what's going on? My key won't work on our home locks." Surprised, Jason replied with the first thing that came to mind, which wasn't the smartest response given the situation. "Alexis, I thought you were arriving on the 6:30 flight." "How does that matter when I can't get into the house? Why were the locks changed?" "I'll be home in 20 minutes. I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything when I arrive. Please hold on, love." "Well, hurry up because I need to pee and my bladder is really bothering me." Jason continued to apologize over the phone as he grabbed his keys and rushed out the door, but Alexis had already hung up. He broke a few traffic laws but managed to get home within the promised 20 minutes. He ran to the front door and had it open just as Alexis was exiting her car. She gave him an angry look, but still kissed him before heading into the living room. Jason went back to her car to retrieve her suitcase and briefcase. He had poured one of Alexis' favorite ales and had it ready for her when she walked into the kitchen. Seeing her husband with a sheepish smile and the peace offering made her smile in return. She wrapped her arms around him and kissed him. "All right, now explain what's happening with the locks." Jason told Alexis about the break-in and everything that had happened since then. Alexis was shocked at how close she had come to losing the love of her life. Tears streamed down her cheeks at the thought of a life without this special man. She ended up apologizing for being so angry earlier on the phone. When it came to deciding whether to install a security system, Alexis didn't hesitate. Absolutely. We're installing a security system. Katie is coming home from school next weekend, and there's no way I'm putting her in danger. When Alexis arrived at the underground parking garage on Friday morning, she ensured she adhered to her new routine. Before leaving the garage, she placed her keychain in the side compartment of her handbag. After losing her keys the previous month, she took extra precautions to keep them safe. It had taken her more than an hour to locate them, and only with Susan's help, who walked alongside her to retrace her steps from that morning. She was certain she had tossed the keys onto her desk, but an accident on 3rd Avenue made her late for her morning meeting. She barely had time to grab the Harrison file before hurrying to the meeting. Upon returning, she checked her coat pockets, searched beneath her desk, scoured the conference room she had just left, and even emptied the trash can after hearing Susan overhear her muttering curses. Susan ultimately found the keys under the car. Alexis used the door button to secure the car. Jason had taught her this after reading an online article about thieves loitering in parking lots with a device capable of intercepting a key fob's signal to lock and alarm vehicles. The article explained that such a device could replicate the car's unique signal, allowing criminals to unlock and steal anything inside. It mentioned that this might have been how a Spokane woman's car was accessed, leading to her being wrapped D and strangled in Idaho. The theory suggested that the attacker had hidden in the back seat and ambushed her when she returned to her vehicle. Although Alexis initially thought this was somewhat paranoid, her perspective changed after someone attempted to break into their home with a gun. Now she believes that a bit of paranoia might actually be beneficial. Alexis walked through the department, passing by Sandy Mason's cubicle. At that moment he was facing the hallway, and she could sense his gaze on her. The fine hairs at the nape of Alexis's neck bristled. The man was truly unsettling. About 6 months ago, the new hire arrived one morning just as the staff meeting was about to begin. When she entered the conference room, only one chair remained around the table, and the new guy was seated next to it, fixated on her. She had no option but to take the available seat beside him. As she sat down, he brazenly attempted to glance up her skirt. Alexis quickly adjusted her skirt, but his eyes lingered only up to her chest. Instead of confronting him directly with a remark like, "Hey, up here," she placed her hand in front of his face and introduced herself with a sinister smile. A few weeks ago, Sandy actually interrupted a conversation Alexis was having with Susan in the break room. He courteously asked if he could join their table, and neither Alexis nor Susan had the courage to refuse him. One of them politely responded with an "okay." Then they both tried their best to ignore him and continue their discussion. It took them a moment to realize that the creep was listening in. They were laughing about something Alexis had said regarding Jason's one bad habit when they noticed Sandy grinning at her. That afternoon, Alexis scheduled a meeting with her manager, Hank Dolan, to address Sandy Mason's incompetence and potential harassment. Hopefully, Sandy Mason would either be reassigned or, even better, dismissed. On Friday night, Sandy was sitting in front of his large-screen TV, watching videos he had recorded over the years. Technology had come a long way since his high school days, when he was once reprimanded for capturing candid footage on an old camera. That incident led to serious consequences, as others found his recordings online and interpreted them in ways Sandy hadn't intended. Despite the setback, he managed to avoid long-term repercussions with the help of a skilled lawyer. As Sandy watched clips he had collected over time, he remembered the effort he had put into capturing these moments. Many of the clips showed Alexis in casual settings like at work or grabbing coffee. One of his favorite scenes was a short clip of Alexis jogging in the park, but he wished he could edit out other people who appeared in the background. Sandy had recently started experimenting with drone footage, enjoying the views it offered from above. One memorable moment involved a day when Alexis was out in her yard. Sandy thought she might have noticed the drone, as she briefly looked up before heading inside, seemingly curious about the device hovering above. That brief connection, catching someone's attention even from a distance, was something Sandy found thrilling. In another instance, Alexis's husband, Jason, had noticed the drone and came outside. Startled, Sandy quickly maneuvered the drone away, not wanting to attract attention or break any regulations. He wondered if he should report Jason's reaction to authorities, knowing that interference with drones was technically against the rules. However, Sandy decided to keep the matter to himself, not wanting to draw any more scrutiny to his activities. After the movie concluded, Sandy wiped himself down with a tissue and reflected on that afternoon. My God, she was an incredible woman. Sandy realized too late that his audit report for Graves had been poorly executed. His attention was elsewhere for nearly the entire time he was examining the Portland office's finances. It became clear that the only reason Mr. Dolan gave Sandy a mere warning was because of Alexis's efforts to protect him. This must explain why she traveled to Portland personally, aiming to reconcile with Graves to prevent Sandy from getting into further trouble with their manager. By Monday morning, he promised himself he would stay focused on his work to avoid additional issues. Losing his job would mean sacrificing all the time he cherished being close to Alexis. In the meantime, until Monday, he planned to determine his next move in eliminating Jason Tyler. On a Saturday morning, Alexis and Jason were preparing for their run. Alexis needed an outlet for her frustration, all directed at her ineffective boss. As she vented, Jason listened attentively and respectfully. I can't believe Hank let Mason off with just a warning. My entire week was wasted because of his lack of effort. And when I reported the inappropriate behavior to Hank, he just told me to speak with HR. Jason understood when to remain silent. He knew it was challenging for women in the workplace, especially those who are often judged by appearances. Jason felt fortunate to be married to someone he admired, who had remained supportive and loyal through all their years together. Alexis had returned to her fitness level not long after their daughter Katie was born, showing her commitment to self-care and family. Jason thought back to their vacation in the Bahamas, their first time alone together since Katie's birth. With Katie staying with his parents, they flew to Miami and then took a boat to Nassau, where they spent 6 days and nights in a beautiful tropical paradise. Alexis wore a new swimsuit, and they enjoyed the freedom and relaxation of the open beaches and sunshine. This trip became a cherished memory, one they often looked back on fondly. By the time Jason finished stretching and was ready to run, Alexis had started to feel calmer. They set off toward the park, which was half a mile away and had a pleasant trail leading to the waterfront. At the northern end of the park, there was a hill with a carved staircase, 290 steps to the top. On good days, they could run the entire route there and back without stopping. On their way back, they decided to walk the final mile, feeling that the stress from the week had drained their energy. Jason noticed a man sitting on a park bench, holding a smartphone at an odd angle. He had seen similar behavior before, often from people attempting to record others discreetly. Twice before, Jason had confronted people for this behavior on public beaches, but he focused on staying calm now, just observing to make sure nothing inappropriate was happening. Jason continued watching the man briefly, wondering why he would be filming them, especially since Alexis's outfit was entirely standard for running. Meanwhile, Alexis, feeling excited about Katie's return home, chatted with Jason about their family plans for the next few weeks, not noticing the man on the bench. After they passed him, Jason turned to Alexis and asked, "Did you notice that guy with the cell phone? I think he might have been trying to record us." Alexis spun around and quickly snapped her head back. "Oh my God, that's Sandy Mason. What the heck? Isn't he the guy you said was harassing you? Why is he filming us?" "I told you there was something strange about Mason. Should I go back and confront him?" "And do what?" "He's just sitting in a public park. And we can't prove he's filming us unless you grab his phone before he leaves or deletes the footage. I'll include this in my report to HR on Monday morning. Alexis, I need you to be more cautious and stay alert. I don't trust this guy. Start carrying that mace spray I bought you. Don't argue about it, just do it. Although Alexis felt uneasy about carrying that damn mace spray, she knew Jason was right. She was even more unsettled now than she was yesterday. Jason hadn't mentioned it to Alexis, but he realized he'd seen the guy on that park bench at least once before. He knew the police couldn't do anything about someone sitting on a public park bench, even if the person was using their phone to film. However, Jason had other resources. As soon as he returned home, he called the agency his brokerage firm used for investigations. He left a message for the owner to contact him as soon as possible, but no later than Monday morning. On Monday, Alexis met with Clyde Walker from Human Resources to discuss her concerns. She mentioned seeing Sandy Mason at the park on Saturday and suspected that Sandy was using his phone to film them. As expected, Clyde responded that this information couldn't be used against Sandy. However, Clyde informed her that he would speak with Sandy on Tuesday and issue a general warning about giving unwanted attention to female employees, which could be perceived as harassment. "Are you going to reveal that I was the one who complained?" Alexis asked. "No, Alexis. I will keep your identity anonymous. We are permitted to do this when issuing a warning. If the situation escalates, we might need to present the signed complaint. If Sandy hires an attorney, the lawyer will likely request to see the complaint. Let's hope that a warning will be enough to change Sandy's behavior." "I will personally follow up," Clyde assured her. Feeling hopeful for a change in Sandy's behavior and to prevent further confrontation, Alexis left the meeting. She had been raised by her kind-hearted mother, who taught her to see the best in people. Her mother always tried to explain away others' bad behavior by believing there must be a reason behind it, unable to accept that some individuals could simply be evil. Alexis did her best to live by her mother's philosophy. In high school, she was the captain of the cheer squad and homecoming queen. She aimed to be gracious and largely succeeded, but difficult people like Sandy Mason tested her mother's teachings. Since that first meeting in the conference room 6 months ago, Alexis has felt uneasy whenever she finds herself near Sandy Mason in the department. Dave Phillips, the proprietor of Phillips Investigations, met with Jason at 11 a.m. Throughout the weekend, Dave diligently monitored his equipment, retrieved Jason's message on Saturday afternoon, and arranged the meeting for Monday morning, as both believed the situation required urgent attention. "Dave, I need you to investigate everything possible about this Mason guy. Where is he from? What's his background? Could he be a threat?" Alexis mentioned he joined her department 6 months ago and keeps his personal life private. She steers clear of him, and although some colleagues have tried to engage with him, they haven't succeeded, Jason explained. As Jason spoke, Dave took notes. Looking up from his notepad, he responded, "I'll reach out to our attorney this morning and have them contact Alexis's HR department. It's crucial for us to obtain Mason's background information, especially since Alexis filed a formal complaint following Saturday morning's event. Our attorney won't take no for an answer, or we'll proceed with legal action. I'm not sure how thoroughly the company vetted Mason, but we'll investigate further. Thanks, Dave. You understand how important this is to me. I already mentioned the break-in at our house, and combined with this, I'm really on edge and need answers. Consider it handled. We'll start working on it today. I have some availability this week, and I'll assign Dwayne Larson, one of our top agents, to this case. We'll find the answers you need." "What about involving the police?" "When we have substantial information, we'll provide it to the authorities. Currently, we only know that a coworker has been acting oddly and was spotted in a public park twice. If the police contact Mason now with the information we have, it might cause him to go into hiding and become more cautious. You know, something just occurred to me. A few weeks ago, a drone flew over our property and hovered near Alexis while she was sunbathing. Can you check if Mason owns a drone? I'll investigate that. I believe some of the larger drones are registered with the FAA, so we can look into it. If you think of anything else, those minor details that didn't seem important before, give me a call on my mobile. Every little bit helps if we need to involve the police. Meanwhile, would you feel safer if we assigned a bodyguard to Alexis? Let's postpone that for now. It doesn't add up that Mason would attempt to break into our house while Alexis was away. He must have known she was in Portland. True, that's puzzling. However, from my experience, many of these unstable individuals act illogically to anyone who's considered sane. It's possible the break-in and the stalking are unrelated, but we'll treat them as connected until proven otherwise. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you addressing this immediately and giving our concerns your personal attention. What did you expect? You're not just a client. You and Alexis have been friends for years. With that, Jason and Dave stood up, shook hands, and Jason left Dave's office, heading back to his own office down the street. As he walked, Jason became more aware of his surroundings, even watching reflections in shop windows as he passed by. Seeing his friend depart, Dave promptly picked up the phone. Alice, could you please have Dwayne come see me? Thanks. Sandy Mason was growing increasingly frustrated and angry. On Tuesday morning, he was summoned to the HR department and informed that a serious complaint of potential intimacy harassment had been filed against him by a female colleague in his department. He knew exactly who had complained. It had to be that biatch Susan Oster. He was aware that she was envious of the relationship he shared with Alexis. He was determined to make her pay and had a clear plan in mind. However, Sandy's more urgent and pressing concern was eliminating Jason Tyler. It had been nearly a week since he tried to break into the Tyler residence, and he still couldn't devise a better strategy than the one that had failed. Returning to the house was out of the question. On Thursday evening, he had driven by the Tyler home and noticed a new ADT security sign. While he knew some of these signs were fake, he didn't believe this one was and didn't want to take any chances. No matter how much he pondered the options for killing Jason, each plan carried risks of danger or the possibility of being caught afterward. What good would it do to remove Jason from the equation if he ended up in jail and unable to marry Alexis? The mere thought of jail made Sandy shudder. Just remembering how close he had come to spending time in juvenile detention during high school always elicited the same reaction. But this time, it sparked a new idea in his mind. What if he didn't kill Jason? What if he simply removed him by framing him for a crime that would keep him away for a long time? The crime would need to be so heinous that Alexis would have no choice but to divorce him. What could accomplish that? Sandy was deep in thought about his dilemma while staring at the computer terminal in his cubicle. His determination to focus on his work slipped away. Then he saw Alexis's reflection in his screen as she walked past his cubicle, and the solution became clear. If he killed the Tyler's daughter and ensured that Jason was framed and convicted for the crime, it would guarantee Alexis's divorce from Jason. Additionally, Sandy wouldn't have to deal with Jason's offspring. A smile spread across Sandy's face as he contemplated the plan. This deserves some more consideration, he mused to himself. With this new idea in mind, Sandy decided it was time to retaliate against Susan. Using an alias, he signed up for the online dating service he had overheard her mention. Within half an hour, he found her profile, and Mr. Sam Martin sent a request to meet Ms. Susan Oster soon. Satisfied with his progress, Sandy leaned back in his chair with a self-satisfied grin and was finally able to focus on his work again. Susan spent the early part of the week auditing the Eugene office, so it wasn't until Thursday afternoon that she and her friend could finally sit down and update each other on their lives. Alexis recounted what had happened the previous Saturday in the park and the following Monday morning in HR. Susan couldn't help but notice that Alexis seemed to glance around the cafe before beginning to speak. While Susan was taken aback by the park incident, she wasn't at all surprised by Clyde's inaction, thinking that most of the men in HR lacked the necessary courage. After some time, Alexis realized she was monopolizing the conversation and turned the focus to Susan's weekend date. Another online date didn't work out. He was nice enough, but by the end of the night, we both realized we weren't what the other was looking for. Hearing about Susan's latest disappointing experience broke Alexis's heart. Susan's first marriage had ended after she caught her husband cheating for the second time. She had given him another chance after the first infidelity, which involved an office affair with his secretary. The couple sought counseling after her husband begged Susan to forgive him, but during their second month of therapy, he was discovered cheating again with the secretary. In reality, the secretary reported him, hoping this would be the best way to win him over herself. Good luck with that, sweetie. Anyway, since Tuesday evening I've been talking to someone who seems like a decent guy. We're planning to meet up soon. He's been working on a major project and wants to finish it first. He mentioned it should be within the next week or so. Alexis looked at her friend and tried her best to sound encouraging. That's great. One day, the right guy will come along and make you very happy. You deserve it. Once again, Alexis silently felt grateful not to be in Susan's situation. Despite the underlying tension, the Tyler household remained mostly peaceful throughout the week. Thanks to Dave Phillips' efforts, the security system was fully functional and active. Katie was expected to return home on Friday after completing her final exam for the summer quarter on Thursday. Both Alexis and Jason were excited about the 3 weeks Katie had before she needed to go back to school for the fall semester. Alexis and Jason planned to take the next 2 weeks off work to spend time with Katie at their cabin on Lake Wenatchee in eastern Washington, enjoying hiking and fishing. In the second week, Katie's boyfriend was scheduled to visit. It seemed that Katie was quite serious about this young man, though Alexis hoped the relationship wasn't too intense, since Katie was only 20 years old. Jason was looking forward to meeting him, as he tends to be a protective papa bear when it comes to Katie, perfectly complementing Alexis's mama lion nature. Fortunately, Katie understood that her parents' behavior was out of love and took it in stride with a sense of humor. On his way home Friday, Jason made a stop at Dave Phillips' office. Dwayne provided Jason with an update on his current findings. Sandy is just a nickname. His full name is Sanders Austin Mason. He's 28 years old and was born in Vancouver, Washington. His last job was with Exxon in Houston. We attempted to find out why he left Exxon, but it's proving to be as challenging as breaking into the Pentagon. However, we did discover that he has no arrests or convictions in Texas or any other state as an adult. This is where things get tricky. We're fairly certain Mason has a juvenile record. He attended the public high school in Vancouver during his freshman and sophomore years, but his name doesn't appear in the school yearbook the following year. We also checked local private schools and found no records of his attendance. His parents remained in the same house during that time, yet he wasn't enrolled in any nearby school. Using the yearbook and a local phone directory, we reached out to a few former classmates. While no one identified themselves as a friend, 2 classmates recalled rumors about Sandy Mason taking upskirt photos, and there was even an unverified rumor about a hole in the girls' locker room. He seems to disappear until he turns 19 and goes to college. If he has a juvenile record, a competent attorney would have it expunged unless it involves an intimacy offense conviction. Since we found none of those, it's reasonable to assume he hasn't committed RPE. Jason exhaled deeply, realizing he had been holding his breath while Dave spoke. Well, I guess that's somewhat reassuring, but what's our next move? We'll get to that shortly. There are 2 more things you need to know. First, Mason owns a drone, a high-end model with an advanced camera. A neighbor in the building across from his apartment has seen him on the roof with it. Once the drone takes off from the roof, he disappears, likely returning to his apartment where he can control and monitor it using the camera. He doesn't come back to the roof until the drone lands. Is that legal? Yes, the regulations around drones are currently a gray area. Neither our state legislature nor the federal government has kept up with the rapid advancements in drone technology. As usual, the federal authorities were caught off guard. Okay, you mentioned two things. What else? The second point is more concerning. Mason owns a 9mm Glock. Are you familiar with handguns? Enough to know what it is. I couldn't identify the gun I saw the night of the break-in. It was too dark and too far away. Does Mason have a concealed carry permit? No, but most criminals don't bother obtaining a concealed carry permit. Have you considered carrying a weapon yourself? That's not going to happen. Alexis is afraid of guns, especially handguns. I'm lucky she allows my shotgun in the house. Understandably, I wouldn't recommend carrying a firearm if you're not comfortable with it. Too many bad things can happen if you're not trained and prepared to handle situations properly. I know you bought Alexis a handheld mace canister. You might want to get one for yourself and your daughter as well. Now, to answer your earlier question, it might be costly, but I'd like to hire a Texas-based law firm to access Exxon's records. I estimate it will cost at least a few $1,000s, possibly more if Exxon resists. However, with the right law firm, we can obtain a judge's order compelling Exxon to release Mason's personnel files. Securing a judge's order would allow Exxon to use it as protection against any counter-lawsuit from Mason. What are your thoughts? Jason didn't hesitate. Go ahead. Dave, Dwayne, and Jason spent another 30 minutes going over the investigation's details. Once more, Dave mentioned the possibility of hiring a bodyguard. Dwayne was unavailable because he would be in Texas, but Dave had other alternatives. Although Jason still thought it was unnecessary, he stopped by the outdoor store on his way home and purchased 2 canisters of pepper spray. When Jason returned home that evening, he couldn't help but smile broadly upon seeing Katie's car in the driveway. It was wonderful to have her back, even if it was just for 3 weeks. As he stepped inside, Katie immediately embraced him with a tight hug. However, he was confused by the serious expression on her face. When are you going to tell me about the break-in? Jason noticed the tears in Katie's eyes as she looked into his. She didn't wait for his response. If something ever happened to you or Mom, I don't know how I'd manage. Please promise me you'll always keep both you and Mom safe. Promise. Jason realized Katie was acting completely irrationally. He glanced over her shoulder to see Alexis standing about 10 feet away, also tearful as she watched the interaction between father and daughter. Jason's first thought was how he would handle the next few weeks if the 2 women in his life remained so emotional. His second thought was how lucky he was to have 2 amazing women who cared so deeply about their family. Could life get any better than this? He hugged his daughter once more and assured her that he would do everything in his power to keep himself and his family safe. The rest of the evening was filled with lively conversation. Alexis barely had time to eat as she recounted the events of the past semester, especially animated when talking about the amazing young man she was dating. Charles Owen, it turns out, was in his final year studying engineering, part of ROTC, and planned to join the Army as a 2nd lieutenant right after graduation. As Jason listened to all the commendable qualities of this young man, he silently told himself to be prepared for a visit from him. He had a hunch he would soon meet his future son-in-law. Katie brought up the break-in again. This was a topic Jason had been struggling with ever since his meeting with the detectives. On one hand, he didn't want to frighten Alexis or Katie. On the other, he didn't want them to underestimate the potential danger. Jason explained the details of the night the break-in occurred, describing how he had threatened the intruder with a shotgun. Katie glanced at her mother, aware of her mother's feelings about firearms. She did laugh when Jason recounted shouting down the stairs. "Come on up. Got a little surprise for you?" "Dad, that's hilarious. Is that something out of one of your Bruce Willis movies?" "I'm not sure, sweetheart. It just felt like the right thing to say at the time. Anyway, it seemed to work because 2 seconds later I heard the screen door slam. Thank goodness I've never fired a gun at a living thing before. Who knows how I would have reacted if it had come to that." With Jason's last sentence, the dining room fell silent for a few moments. Alexis broke the tension by asking Jason and Katie to clear their plates, saying she would load the dishwasher while they spent some time alone together. Both Katie and Jason thought this was an excellent idea. They each had something they wanted to discuss without disturbing Alexis. "Katie, let's take a walk around the block." As they walked, Jason broke the silence. "Look, I didn't want to worry your mother too much, but this Mason guy could be more dangerous than I initially suggested. One of the detectives is set to investigate Mason's former residence and workplace next week. I aim to gather more information on this suspect before your mother returns to work in 2 weeks. I've at least ensured that your mother has a mace canister when she's alone in the parking garage, and I also bought one for you. I hope you'll consider carrying it, just as a precaution." Katie then felt it was her moment to disclose something she hadn't planned to share with her mother. "Dad, I hope this doesn't make you think badly of Charles, but he has taught me how to handle a handgun. I have a concealed carry permit and own a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. I practice at the range with Charles and am quite skilled. You keep the mace, and I'll keep my Smith & Wesson." Jason was momentarily taken aback but quickly regained his composure to respond. "Where is it currently?" "I can't imagine how your mother would react if she knew there was a gun in the house or the cabin. It's stored in my bedroom with a trigger lock to ensure it's safe when I'm not around. I keep the key on me. While I don't want to hide anything from your mom, give me some time to figure out how we can get her to agree to having it in the house. Let's keep this between us for the time being." The more Sandy contemplated his grudge against Katie Tyler, the more reasons he found to handle things differently. Firstly, any attempt to set Jason up for wrongdoing would require flawless evidence, a nearly impossible feat. Moreover, if Katie were to remain unharmed, neither he nor Alexis would benefit financially, and Jason might end up facing significant legal costs. All of Katie's assets would be out of reach, and Sandy was counting on those funds, along with some form of financial support, to start a new chapter with Alexis. He wasn't keen on working hard and imagined that, with enough resources, he could enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. Realizing his initial plan wouldn't work, Sandy decided to pivot. His new approach was more straightforward, confronting Jason on the street in a way that might look like an accidental encounter gone wrong. Since there was no clear connection between him and Jason, he figured that his role would remain undetected. Sandy was strategic in his efforts. To ensure that any incident was seen as a random crime, he spent Saturday night tagging gang symbols on a couple of nearby buildings. On Sunday, he watched the local news with satisfaction. A news reporter was on site in front of one of the tagged locations, fervently asking, "What does the recent spike in graffiti activity mean for the safety of our community's residents?" Sandy was grateful for quiet news days. It was the Tuesday evening of the subsequent week when Susan Oster exited the lounge feeling slightly intoxicated. She didn't think she was too impaired to drive home. It had been an exhausting day, and the night had been disappointing. Her online date, Sam Martin, was supposed to join her at the lounge for their first meeting but never showed up. Feeling too upset to eat, Susan had consumed 2 Cosmos, which began to take effect. As she unlocked her car, she was puzzled when a sweet-smelling cloth was placed over her face. She collapsed to the ground, but two arms supported her and shoved her into the back seat before she lost consciousness. When Susan regained consciousness, the first thing she saw was Sandy Mason staring at her from between the front seats. She attempted to move, but her arms and legs were tied, and the shoulder strap restricted her movement further. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness until she could clearly see the gun Mason was pointing at her. "Sandy, what are you doing? Let me go." Susan's voice was weak, but the seriousness of her situation began to sink in as her mind cleared from the haze. Susan, first explain why you reported me at work." "What are you talking about? I never complained about you. Why are you saying that?" "Don't lie to me, you biatch. I know you told HR that I was harassing you." "Why would I do that? You never harassed me. It was Alexis who filed a complaint with HR because you kept stalking her." As soon as she spoke, she realized her mistake, but she was still disoriented. "You're lying. Alexis loves me. She would never do that." "Alexis loves you? What are you talking about?" "I mean that once Jason is out of the picture, Alexis and I are going to get married." Susan was shocked by Mason's revelation. How could he be so out of touch? "Look, Sandy, just release me. I didn't report you to HR, and I promise I won't tell anyone about tonight. Please, just let me go." Sandy Mason appeared confused and needed time to think. He opened the car door and walked into the Trailhead parking lot. Their car was the only one there at 1 a.m., and they were miles away from anyone else, so there was no need to gag Susan while he paced the parking lot trying to gather his thoughts. 10 minutes later, he returned, and Susan was looking at him before the dome light turned off, plunging them back into darkness. "All right, I'm going to let you go, but you need to answer my questions and remember your promise not to tell anyone about tonight. Understood?" Susan could only nod in agreement. She answered his questions, somehow hoping that by cooperating, Sandy might spare her life. She was terrified and grasping for any chance of survival. Sandy initially planned to make Susan suffer as part of his elaborate scheme, but as he observed her, he realized she wasn't fully aware of her role in the unfolding events. Though he intended to proceed with his plan, he decided to make it less direct. Gathering the necessary information, Sandy stepped out of the vehicle, preparing to calm Susan. As he approached her, Susan's relief quickly shifted to apprehension, recognizing a change in his demeanor. "Please don't," she pleaded, her voice full of fear. Sandy reassured her softly, maintaining control of the situation. After a moment, he secured her carefully, ensuring she was unable to resist further. "I'm sorry, Susan," he whispered. With his initial plan complete, Sandy carried her to a location off the trail. He made sure to leave no identifiable traces, choosing a secluded spot where it would be difficult for anyone to discover what had happened. His thoughts then turned to Alexis and her family, determined to ensure that she experienced the consequences of their actions against him. He envisioned the fear and regret she would feel as her world unraveled. A small, sinister smile crossed his face as he returned to his car, his new plan forming with each passing moment. Instead of the previous impulsive idea, he now had a precise direction. An isolated cabin, the perfect setting for what he envisioned. His focus shifted to executing his plan with the precision and patience it deserved. Due to an important court appearance, Dwayne Larson didn't arrive in Houston until Tuesday. The initial law firm he had been referred to in Seattle declined the case because of a conflict of interest. Initially disappointed, Dwayne had assumed the Seattle attorneys had orchestrated this before his trip. Fortunately, the Houston firm kindly provided him with a second referral, and by Wednesday afternoon, Dwayne was meeting with Schuler and Simmons to discuss the matter. George Schuler agreed to attend any meetings Dwayne could set up with Exxon representatives. Feeling more optimistic, Dwayne reached out to Exxon and secured a meeting with the Vice President of Personnel Relations for Thursday morning. He confirmed George Schuler's availability and spent the time before the meeting conducting research at the local library's computer. On Thursday morning, Dwayne and George met with Howard Grimley at Exxon. Grimley welcomed them warmly, offered coffee, tea, or a soft drink, and invited them to sit down. Given the seriousness of the discussion, Dwayne was surprised that Grimley didn't close the office door. Grimley's assistant was seated just outside and could overhear their conversation. "Mr. Larson, Mr. Schuler," Grimley began, "shortly after receiving your call to arrange this meeting, I reviewed Sanders Mason's personnel file and consulted with our in-house legal team. Unfortunately, I am not permitted to let you examine the file or discuss its contents unless a subpoena is presented." Dwayne and George exchanged glances, silently questioning why Grimley hadn't conveyed this information over the phone. Grimley continued, "However, I want to assure you that Exxon will fully comply with any subpoena and will not try to obstruct it in any way. Mr. Larson, I'm not aware of the full extent of your investigation, but it doesn't surprise me that someone is interested in Mr. Mason's background. I regret that I can't provide more information." Dwayne observed Grimley's body language, noting that Grimley seemed to be handling the situation as if teasing a fish in front of a seal in an aquarium. Sensing the meeting was concluded, Dwayne stood up. Both he and George shook Grimley's hand, and they left with the intention of obtaining a subpoena. Dwayne knew this process would take at least another day and cost thousands of dollars, with no guarantee of success. He hoped George had connections with a sympathetic judge. As they passed the assistant's desk, she stood and offered to escort them to the building's front door. The elevator ride was quiet, but just before exiting through the revolving doors, the assistant shook Dwayne's hand and said, "Let's have lunch, Mr. Larson. Just the two of us." Dwayne felt the paper in his hand and simply nodded. While George was calling a cab, Dwayne took a moment to examine the paper, which contained a phone number. 2 hours later, Dwayne was quietly seated across the table from Elaine Stewart, Grimley's assistant. "I understand your attorney is currently working on obtaining a subpoena, but there are details about Sandy Mason that aren't included in the file," she explained. "Aren't you worried about getting into trouble with your boss by meeting with me?" Dwayne asked. "Not at all. Mr. Grimley specifically requested that I meet with you. He's one of the good guys. While he's legally restricted, he'll do everything he can to help you protect that woman up north." When we let Mason go, he was concerned we were just delaying the inevitable. But without police involvement, our options were limited. When the Seattle firm contacted us for a reference, Mr. Grimley tried his best to warn them without violating corporate policies. I overheard his side of the conversation, but clearly, whoever he spoke to there either didn't understand the subtle warnings or chose to ignore them. The file contains documentation of the 2 warnings Mason received for harassing 2 female employees in his department. One of the complaints included a woman's assertion that she was certain he was rubbing himself under the table during a conference meeting. Mr. Grimley was in the process of terminating Mason when Mason suddenly resigned, giving less than a week's notice. We were relieved that the entire episode seemed to be over, but a week later, we received an inquiry from the Houston police regarding Mason, prompted by a request from a Mexican police department. The Tamaulipas State Police were investigating the death of a woman whose body was found in the desert and were looking for Mason, who had left Texas abruptly. Mr. Grimley contacted the police after receiving the call from Seattle, but that was the last we heard from the authorities or anyone else until your office reached out last week. So are you unaware of what transpired with the deceased woman and the Mexican police investigation? That's the troubling part. Informally, Mr. Grimley asked me to look into it because my brother-in-law is a police officer, and here's what I discovered. The woman was a Mexican citizen holding a work visa in Texas. Evidence showed she connected with Sandy Mason through an online dating site, and her friends believed she dated Mason, but ended the relationship after their second date. They couldn't understand why she was found in Mexico since she rarely crossed the border except to visit her family on Sundays, and always returned to the U.S. before nightfall. The Mexican authorities wanted to speak with Mason because their records indicated he had entered the country a few days before a farmer discovered the body. There was no record of the woman's entry into Mexico. There wasn't enough evidence to extradite Mason, but they did request that the Houston Police Department interview him. Houston detectives questioned Mason once, the day before he submitted his resignation notice. A week later, a detective came to our office seeking Mason for a follow-up interview, but his apartment was empty. We shared the limited information we had. As I mentioned, that's all we heard from the police. If you're aware of the current activities of prohibited substances gangs across the border, you'd understand that this wasn't a priority for the Mexican police. However, my brother-in-law mentioned that if Mason returns to Mexico, there is a warrant for his arrest. Dwayne and Ms. Stewart finished their lunch, with Ms. Stewart providing additional details in response to Dwayne's questions. They went their separate ways, and Dwayne called his boss in Seattle to relay the news. As soon as Dave Phillips hung up the phone with Dwayne, he called Jason, but his call went to voicemail. On that same Thursday, Sandy drove past the Tyler cabin, reflecting on how life had felt so unfair and wondering when he'd finally catch a break. He noticed that one of the cars parked in the driveway the previous night was gone, suggesting that either Alexis or the Tyler girl was away. Sandy would have preferred to sort things out the night before, but as he neared the cabin, motion-activated lights clicked on, casting a glow over the yard. The next morning, Jason Tyler was outside mowing the lawn as Sandy drove by again. Using Google Earth, Sandy had a good sense of the surrounding area, and a quick drive past the neighbors confirmed they were absent, removing any potential obstacles to his plans. Sandy continued down the gravel road, parked in the state park lot, took his mountain bike off the back carrier, and headed down the lakeside path. He figured that using a bicycle would attract less attention and be easier to keep out of sight. As he prepared, Sandy found himself less disturbed by his memories of past actions. Over time, his sense of guilt had waned, though he hadn't forgotten those moments. He recalled moving to Seattle after an unsettling encounter with a detective from Houston, a reminder of the risks he faced. There, he thought he'd left behind the doubts that had once plagued him. But now, as he approached the Tyler cabin's back entrance, he felt no hesitation. This time, I'm going to see things through, he told himself. Amid the hum of the mower, Jason believed he heard a scream. Glancing upward, he was certain he saw two individuals through the large plate glass window. Momentarily taken aback, Jason made a potentially deadly mistake by activating the mower's kill switch, dashing across the lawn and hurrying into the cabin. Katie drove up the cabin's gravel driveway, sensing that something was off. Throughout all the years she had lived there, she couldn't recall her father ever leaving a tool on the lawn. Yet the mower was now sitting out. Was she merely being paranoid because of her father's warnings about her mother's stalker? How could the stalker possibly know their location this week? For some reason, as she sat in the car lost in thought, she noticed it was unusual that neither her father nor her mother came to the door to welcome her, something they always did for each other and for her. For a moment, Katie considered a worst-case scenario. Maybe her parents took advantage of her absence to spend some private time together. However, this didn't explain the mower being left out. Surely her parents weren't so indiscreet that they couldn't take a few seconds to store their tools. Whether she was being paranoid or not, Katie had a gut feeling. She reached into her purse, pulled out a pistol, and chambered a hollow point round by pulling back the slide. Keeping the gun in her hand with her finger off the trigger as Charles had taught her, she concealed it discreetly with a shopping bag. Katie exited the car, walked up the front steps, and entered the cabin. It became clear to Katie that she was mistaken. The worst-case scenario wasn't her parents having intimacy. It was something far worse. "Come on in, little lady, you must be Katie," a voice called. Inside the great room, Jason and Alexis sat on the sofa, and a man with wild eyes and a handgun was perched on a bar stool behind them, the gun aimed at the back of her mother's head. I said, "Come in and join the party. You're a girl of easy virtue of a mother has been leading me on, making me believe she was interested in me, while she was always laughing with that bitch Susan Oster at my expense. Susan isn't laughing anymore, and neither will your mother in a few hours. Come on in." Katie froze, struggling to think. She recalled everything Charles had taught her over the past year. She had a clear shot at Mason, but she knew she couldn't draw the gun quickly enough to prevent her mother from being shot first. Charles had explained that it wasn't like the movies. It was nearly impossible to fire a shot before the perpetrator did. In reality, the hostage's head would end up with a large hole. Mason misinterpreted Katie's immobility. "Are you scared? Paralyzed by fear? It's going to be much nicer than I expected," he teased, casting a menacing glance at Jason and Alexis. "Your father is not that cool without support," he grinned, brandishing the weapon threateningly. Mason smiled grimly and turned to Katie. "And just because I can, I'll make sure your parents regret getting in my way." While pacing the room, Mason was distracted, giving Katie a brief but decisive moment. She dropped her bag on the floor, catching his attention for a moment, exactly what she needed. In that split second, Katie raised her 9mm pistol and aimed with calm precision. Mason's expression changed when he realized what was going on, but it was too late. Katie didn't hesitate. With unwavering determination, she acted exactly as she had been taught. The first step was crucial, as Mason was no longer a threat. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Jason quickly knocked the weapon out of Mason's hands, making sure it was out of range. They were relieved when they realized that the immediate danger was over. Later, Jason would reflect on this moment, wondering if he shouldn't have acted sooner. Deep down, he knew that he was ready to protect his family, and this time the timing worked in their favor. At the moment, he was just grateful that his family was safe. He hugged Alexis tightly and reached out to Katie. It took Katie a while to empty her gun before joining them. Alexis noticed this, gradually realizing what her sister had done. "Where did this come from? What is it?" she asked, looking at the weapon. Katie and Jason exchanged glances. "We'll talk about it later," Jason assured her. "Just say thank you that our girl knows how to stay calm in an emergency." Within 30 minutes of the Tyler family's 911 call, state troopers and county sheriffs began arriving at the scene. The circumstances surrounding the incident were clear, showing that Katie had acted in self-defense when she fired her weapon. Another 30 minutes later, Mason's vehicle was discovered, and the items inside provided numerous answers for both the Tyler family and 2 unresolved murders in Florida and Mexico. It took an additional 2 days to locate Susan's body. Mason had kept mementos from all 3 of his killings. Moreover, voyeuristic videos and photographs of hundreds of unsuspecting women were found on thumb drives secured inside a suitcase, with the images dating back 12 years. In the trunk, authorities found a stolen Ontario license plate, Canadian maps, and a guidebook for the Caribbean islands and Venezuela. It was evident that Sandy Mason had planned to flee through Canada and hide in a place where he could avoid being apprehended. 4 days later, Jason was perched on the back porch, enjoying a beer while watching the moon rise over the lake. The moon was in its first quarter phase, and the night sky was so dark that countless stars sparkled above. As Jason gazed upward, a shooting star streaked across the Milky Way. He recalled an old saying from his younger days about making a wish on a falling star. "No thanks, I already got my wish," he thought. He offered a quiet prayer of gratitude as he glanced back into the cabin. Inside, illuminated only by a candle on the table, sat his wife, daughter, and Charles, who had arrived earlier that day. Jason wasn't at all surprised that both he and Alexis instantly took a liking to the young man. He was intelligent, respectful, and clearly enamored with Katie. By dinner time that evening, Jason's rough Papa Bear exterior had softened into that of a teddy bear. Alexis found Jason's change in demeanor amusing, especially compared to how he had interacted with Katie's previous suitors. Jason even accepted Charles's offer to take him to the local shooting range to teach him proper handgun handling. When Charles offered the same training to Alexis, she declined, agreeing to keep a handgun in the house, but not ready to fire one. Time would tell if she would change her mind, but for now, it was a small victory that she agreed that outlawing guns would only leave them in the hands of outlaws. As Jason remained on the back porch, finishing his beer and feeling blessed, the screen door opened and Alexis walked out with a few more long-neck bottles in her hands. She handed one to Jason before sitting down beside him. Jason took a sip from the bottle. "This is my 4th beer tonight. I'll probably be up at least once to finish it." "Well, when you come back to bed, don't hesitate to wake me. When was the last time we had a late night together?" Jason smiled, but before he could respond, the screen door opened again, and Charles and Katie stepped out toward the lake. "We're taking the rowboat out and might go for a swim," they announced. Jason and Alexis replied simultaneously, "Take care out there." Alexis laughed and looked into her husband's eyes. "I like him, and I can tell you do too. It's great he's here. He'll help keep Katie's mind off what happened last week. Sandy Mason deserved to die. I just wish our daughter didn't have to be the one to do it. She had a few sleepless nights last weekend. Just now in the kitchen, Katie was opening up about her feelings. Charles held her hands and let her cry again. That young man is much more mature than his age suggests. How did we get so lucky, Jason? I keep thinking about Susan and how tragic it is. She was such a wonderful woman, and her life was so heartbreaking. I find myself crying when I remember how it ended." Jason realized there was nothing to say, so he wrapped his arm around Alexis and simply held his wife.